Alright, hey everybody, welcome back. If you're anything like me, then you've got a long list of shows and movies that you've been intending to watch for a very long time. And that list keeps getting longer and longer by the day. Well, one of those shows that was on my list for a very long time is Fooly Cooly, a fantastic anime from the early 2000s. Like many shows, it had been on my radar for a very, very long time, but I'm incredibly glad that I finally got around to watching it. To be honest, I don't frequently re-watch shows that I've already seen, the same with movies. I don't know if that's strange, but honestly, with so much other stuff to end up watching, I very rarely end up going back to the classics, nor do I really feel any urge to do so with much. But Fooly Cooly, in a very big way, made me want to rewatch it the moment I was done with that last episode. Now, mind you, I'm not talking about any of the reboots. I'm talking about the original Fooly Cooly. We're not talking grunge, alternative, or any of that stuff. I haven't seen all of them, but what I have seen is incredibly inferior to the original show. So before you go any further, I would like to formally recommend that you watch the original Fooly Cooly if you haven't already. It contains a lot of innuendo and doesn't shy away from depicting some uncomfortable topics or scenarios, but if you're okay with that, drop everything and watch it now. After much thought, honestly, I think it's one of my favorite shows of all time, but it's certainly not for everyone. So today, I'd just like to talk a little bit about Fooly Cooly. I'd just like to talk generally about its themes, and I won't really be going over the story all that strongly, but I'd still like to put a spoiler warning here. With all that being said, I'd love to jump right into it. Now, a lot of my opinions are just my own. I think the show can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, and if there's anything that you guys have thought of that I haven't seen, feel free to drop it in the comments down below. I am going to be watching it again, I'm sure, and I'd love to see it through your perspective next time if you have anything to say. Fooly Cooly is a show that means different things to just about everybody who's seen it, I think. At its heart, it's the coming-age story of a boy named Naota, who seems to be stuck in just about every kind of toxic relationship you can think of. Through a lot of metaphors, though honestly calling them metaphors is a little generous considering how heavy-handed they are at times, but through those metaphors, he has to come to terms with the reality of what adulthood is, and becomes more assertive through the series as he chooses what he wants to fight for by himself. I think the central question of Fooly Cooly is, what does adulthood mean to you? That question is sat heavily on my mind since I finished watching a couple of years ago at this point. Fooly Cooly is truly a nonsense word. In the same way as adulthood, people define it for themselves based on what society tells them it should be. I hate to break it to you, but unfortunately we live in a society. That comes with a lot of expectations for our behavior, and a lot of times those expectations don't really do good things to people. Attempting to live up to an impossible standard set for you by a seemingly omnipotent system can be soul-crushing, and often requires you to suppress parts of your very self that are seen as uncouth or irregular. There's a lot of people who have already spoken on topics like this, and I don't know if my voice is going to be a particularly strong one in that cacophony. But I'd like to at least put my hat in the ring and talk a bit about my own personal uncertainties and unfulfilled expectations. I've lived for most of my life with very clear direction for who I wanted to be. Frankly, I don't really think I ever stopped to think about whether that was what I actually wanted. Maybe I just came to a realization of my situation late, but at the time I was in a very uncertain place in my personal life. I still am, to some extent. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, but I knew I wasn't satisfied with my current situation. Despite my circumstances, I found myself at a distance from my emotions, not quite letting myself truly feel them lest it somehow drives me into an indecisive mess. Fooly Cooly, though, drew that dissatisfaction and uncertainty to the surface, which I suppose has led me to making this video, several years after the fact, but still. Everyone has difficulty defining the circumstances they find themselves in. We all have difficulty coming to terms with adulthood. Naota finds himself in his personal life with a lot of flawed relationships. Many of the role models he has are inherently pretty bad people. And they use the word Fooly Cooly in ways that justify their behavior as indicative of their adulthood and maturity. Fooly Cooley teaches us many things through its crazy story, but the one that stuck most with me is that the world can be a much better place if we just swing the bat, per se, and defy the conventional adulthood that has been handed to us, opting instead to create one in our own image. Our perception of ourselves is based on our surroundings, and in particular, the perception of others. What we see in adults is what we think adulthood should be, and what we try and define ourselves as, or measure ourselves up to, once we reach adulthood. Naota defines himself almost exclusively based on his relationships, primarily with the women in his life. He has toxic relationships with most of them. He has toxic relationships with just about everybody. Some of them need to be very, very problematic in many different ways. The biggest thing about Fooly Cooley is that they never solidly define the phrase. All the way up until the end of the show, it's left up in the air somewhat. People have used it in a bunch of different ways, so I suppose you could kind of try and divine some kind of meaning out of it. But in reality, I think it's meant to be that way. A phrase that we define for ourselves, and not one that we take from others. I don't know what I'll become necessarily, or what I have to do to continue moving forwards all the time, but I think we should all try and take a page out of Fooly Cooley's book and just do it. And that's all I really had to say today. Some vaguely philosophical ramblings about a show that I watched a couple of years ago and have watched many times since. I hope that this meant something to you, or if it didn't, there's nothing I can do about it. Whatever. I'm glad you came around and stayed till the end, though. Truly, from the bottom of my heart, it means a lot that you would stick around. There's not a lot of people around here watching right now, and it's great to know that someone's watching. Also, on another note, at the end of this, the election is coming up. I live in the US, and I'm sure many of you do too. There's a lot on the line this election. If you are able to, go out and vote, please. It is getting freaky out there, folks. And whatever comes, I'm sure we'll make it through, but we've got to exercise our right to vote. So please get out there Tuesday or before if you can, and I'll see you in 2 weeks, whatever happens. Bye.